Good afternoon. Well, first, thank you so much for giving me the honor and privilege to come speak with all of you. I heard a lot of fantastic points that Jack mentioned around empathy and technology and being a perpetual learner. And these are all crucial themes when we think about the future of work. Now, what I want to share with you now is based on a true story. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there was a man by the name of Jason. And Jason was supposed to be king of the land. But unfortunately, somebody else sat on Jason's throne. And the king that sat on the throne told Jason that if Jason were to go retrieve a golden fleece and bring it back, that Jason would then be able to become king. And naturally, Jason, with his bravado, said, "Of course, I will take on this challenge." And he assembled a team of mighty warriors and heroes. He had a beautiful ship built for him, and the ship had all the latest and greatest technologies. You could even talk to the ship. And he set out on this journey to try to retrieve the golden fleece. And they battled storms and rough waters and attacked monsters and went through all of these different trials and tribulations. And finally, Jason was able to retrieve the golden fleece. On his way home, they were blown off course to a small island outside of modern-day Crete. And they were blown to this island, and this island was unique because it was patrolled by a creature named Talos. And Talos would walk around the island 3 times a day, hurling huge boulders at people, trying to ward them off from stepping foot onto the island. But Jason and his crew, they had no choice. They were blown off course. They had to go onto the island. And so they were faced to do battle with Talos. Now, through a bit of trickery and wizardry, they were able to remove a small pin from Talos' heel that contained his ichor, or lifeblood. And Talos crumbled beneath Jason. And he was able to then go on the rest of his journey. Now, this story is unique because Talos is our first encounter with AI. Talos is our first encounter with an automaton, and this was many, many years ago. And throughout history, we have seen our obsession with AI, with creating things. In fact, we even saw it in the Muslim religion with this idea of takwin, this idea of creating synthetic life seemingly out of nothing. In Judaism, we saw it with golem, this creature that was created apparently out of clay. And so we've been obsessed with this for many, many years. In 1920, we saw the creation of Rosam's universal robots. And of course, who could forget HAL? And perhaps the most famous piece of AI, the most famous piece of technology that exists, that we're all familiar with, is this one. And so we have long been obsessed with AI, with creating something. This isn't a new concept. It's not a new idea. In fact, I really love this quote from Pamela McCorduck, who says, "AI began with an ancient wish to forge the gods. For thousands of years, we've wanted to create something that is stronger than us, faster than us, smarter than us. Something that could seemingly do things that we would never be able to do. But now, all of a sudden, we're starting to ask, what happens if that wish comes true? What happens if we're finally able to create something like this? What happens if we're finally able to create these gods that roam about planet Earth with all of us? Is that something that we want? Right? As the saying goes, be careful what you wish for." Now, today we see lots of different examples of AI, right? I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Many of you are carrying this in your pocket, right? Consider that many of you in this room are carrying AI in your pocket. Siri, Cortana, Alexa, right? And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many of these all over the place. And many of us are carrying them with us all the time. So AI is already very much integrated into our lives and into how we work. But when we think about modern day times, AI had a little bit of a turbulent start. If we were to look back, the concept, the idea of modern day AI actually was created in 1956 at a conference in Dartmouth. And this was the official creation of the term artificial intelligence, AI. And this was the first time anybody has ever heard that phrase. And after this term, this concept was created at the conference, we saw a lot of excitement in AI. We saw the first golden years from 1956 to 1974. And during the golden years, we saw a lot of investment, a lot of excitement. People were very much wanting to see AI happen. Organizations around the world were putting in money, and the researchers were focusing on these things inside of their laboratories and at schools. Everyone was talking about AI. And unfortunately, shortly thereafter, we got into the first AI winter. And the first AI winter was collectively, a lot of people realized that we're not making that much progress with AI. We seem to have run into a wall. It's becoming expensive. It's starting to take up a lot of time. Maybe this AI stuff isn't going to happen after all. And for a period of a couple years, the conversation around AI subsided a little bit. And it just became one of those things that's never going to happen, but it's kind of cool to think about. And then again, shortly thereafterwards, we saw another resurgence of AI. We saw the boom from 1980 to 1987. And this, we saw the rise of expert systems. And some of you may remember these expert systems. An expert system was built on this logic of if-then. If you give it some kind of an input and feed it some kind of information, then you will get some kind of a response. And when we created this concept, again, there was a lot of excitement around it. We thought, oh my goodness, this if-then stuff, these rise of expert systems, this truly must be the beginning of AI. This is what's going to fuel and drive the future of work. And again, we saw a lot of investment, a lot of organizations putting time and money and resources, educational institutions studying it, the world's top minds trying to crack this idea of AI. And yet again, we ran into more roadblocks. It was expensive. It was time-consuming. And the problem with some of these systems was that if you inputted some sort of a weird value, you would get some kind of gibberish out of the system. So this if-then expert system really only worked for standard data, standard information, stuff that was a little bit more predictable. And when we realized that, we thought, well, surely this cannot be AI. And again, we ran into the situation of funding disappeared, energy disappeared, and we thought it's never going to happen. And then finally, we saw a major breakthrough in AI, something that we thought would never, ever happen. We saw a supercomputer named Deep Blue beat the world chess champion Garry Kasparov in a chess match. And people were shocked. People thought, there is no way this could ever happen. And sure enough, it did. And shortly after, we saw the DARPA Grand Challenge. And the DARPA Grand Challenge was a challenge that said, we want an autonomous vehicle to drive through uncharted terrain by itself for at least 100 miles. And that challenge, too, was completed. It was overcome. And now, all of a sudden, there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of attention being paid to this because we thought, well, we have an autonomous car that drove 100 miles. We saw the world chess champion beaten by a computer, all things we never thought would happen. Clearly, something is now changed, and we are moving in the right direction. And indeed, we are. Now, a couple years ago, some of you may recall that there was a match that was created between Google's DeepMind and the top Go player at the time, Lee Sedol. And Google and their company DeepMind, they created a program called AlphaGo. And they said, we bet that AlphaGo will beat any Go player on planet Earth easily. And a lot of the world's top Go players said, come on, give me a break. Not going to happen. Go is so much more complicated than any other game that exists on planet Earth. Just to give you some context, there are more possible moves in a game of chess than there are atoms that exist in the entire universe. Chess. Go has 300 times as many possible moves than chess. So you can imagine why people thought that there is no way this will happen. And so the match took place. It was a 5-game match between AlphaGo and Lee Sedol. And during one of the matches, something unique happened, during one of the games. And I believe it was game 2. And during game 2, the computer played a crazy move. Move 37. And I'm going to show you move 37. And some of you might look at it and say, oh my God, that's pure garbage. But I'm going to show it to you anyway. See if you can spot move 37. See it? Now, for the few of us in the room who are not Go masters, that is move 37. And this is a very unique move because typically in the game of Go, you start out a little bit more on the outskirts of the game to try to control more territory. And when this move was played, if you look up the YouTube commentary, if you go to YouTube and type move 37 commentary, you will see commentators around the world who think that the computer just went haywire. The computer made a mistake. There's an error. The commentators said that. Even the creators of the program said that. Everybody thought that this was just nuts. It turns out that the computer calculated that there was a 1 in 10,000 1 in 10,000 probability that a human would play this move. And some people thought that this was the beginning of human creativity. This move 37 was the beginning of creativity. And this changed the game of Go forever. Right? This move 37 changed the game of Go forever. And the computer, of course, went on to win 4 games to 1. Now, the company didn't want to stop there. They then created something called AlphaGo Zero. Now, the difference between AlphaGo and AlphaGo Zero is that AlphaGo learned how to play the game of Go by studying all of the games that exist. All of the games that humans have played, AlphaGo had access to that library, to that database. It studied all of those games, and that is how it taught itself to be so great. AlphaGo Zero didn't have access to any games. All AlphaGo Zero knew was the rules of the game. This was a computer that had no ability to access any human games ever. Instead, after the moves, after the basic rules were inputted into the system, the computer played itself hundreds of times, thousands of times. And then the team took AlphaGo Zero and pit it against AlphaGo. And the results were a little scary. AlphaGo Zero crushed AlphaGo 100 games to 0. Now think about what that means. It's sort of like one computer is fighting for humanity and one computer is fighting for computers. Because the way that AlphaGo learned how to play is it studied the world's best humans, and it was able to beat the world's best human. But AlphaGo Zero never looked at any human games. It learned to play on its own as a computer, as an algorithm, and it crushed the computer that was basically representing the humans. And a lot of people believe that this is a game changer, that this is transforming a lot of the conversations on the future of work and what this means. Now, of course, when we talk about AI and when we talk about what all of this means, the first question that we need to ask is, what is AI? How do we define what AI even is? And this is a big challenge because people do not agree on how you define AI. I've talked to technologists and researchers and to some of the people leading this field, and some of them will tell me that Deep Blue wasn't AI. AlphaGo and AlphaGo Zero, that wasn't AI. And some people will say, yes, it was. So collectively, we don't even have an understanding of what AI is. And that's partially because we have a very hard time defining what intelligence is. I mean, think about it. How do you explain and define intelligence? We kind of know what it is, but it's very hard to explain it. And so how do you explain artificial intelligence? So we're still grappling with trying to understand what this means. But collectively, we've come to this understanding that AI is basically this idea of software, of algorithms doing things that humans used to be able to do, and perhaps doing it better. Right? That's kind of the general accepted definition among non-academics and technologists. This idea that software algorithms are doing things that humans used to be able to do, and usually on a little higher knowledge level. So let me give you a couple examples of AI that you probably interact with on a daily basis. Smart assistants. How many of you have an Amazon Alexa product? Okay, almost everybody. How many of you have Siri? How many of you have Cortana? Almost every single person in this room is using or has some sort of a smart assistant, right? It's already here. It's already a part of how we live and work. So if you have a smart assistant of any kind, you're activating and using AI. Have you ever purchased anything on Amazon? Do you ever use Netflix? All those recommendations for things to buy, for movies to watch, that's all being powered and fueled by AI. Fraud detection by your bank. You ever get a notification that maybe somebody else is trying to access your account? Funds are being withdrawn? That too is oftentimes by AI. Instead of a human sitting there and looking at all of your transactions, it immediately gets flagged by AI. Customer service via chatbot. I heard Jack mention that earlier. Most of these chatbots that you interact with and use, most of these chatbots that we've heard of, are powered by AI. So truly, it is everywhere. Investing. A lot of my funds are invested with a robo-advisor. Algorithms, software that's constantly monitoring and looking at markets and trying to figure out how to optimize my funds. And a lot of you, where your money is invested, chances are they're using some sort of AI for this as well. News and sports articles. If you go to Yahoo News, many of the articles that you might read about a sporting event or some sort of a news announcement that comes out, many of those are written by AI, and we don't even realize it. Flying. Anytime you fly in a plane, around 7 to 9 minutes of actual flying time is done by a human. Almost all of the other stuff is being done by an algorithm, by software. Right? Kind of freaky to think about. Ride sharing? Ever taken an Uber or Lyft? Any of those ride sharing platforms? Also AI. Email spam filters? Also AI. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Right? We see this everywhere. And I love this quote by Andrew Ng. He's the former chief scientist at Baidu. He helped create Coursera. And he said, AI is the new electricity. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because think about it. Electricity is something that you can't see, yet it powers everything. AI is the new electricity. Eventually, it will be just like electricity. It will power everything. AI isn't necessarily something that you see. AI is something that you interact with without actually knowing that you're interacting with it. I mean, most of the time when we use Siri or Alexa, we don't consciously think, hey, I'm interacting with AI right now. We've just become so used to using it that it's just kind of there. It's a part of how we live. It's a part of how we start our day, how we interact. We don't consciously think that this is AI. Now, a lot of technologists believe that we are at what's called the second half of the chessboard. Now, there's a story about the inventor of the game of chess. And his name was Sissa. And he created the game of chess many, many years ago. And he created the game of chess and he presented it to the ruler of the land at the time, who saw the game and was so proud that he said, you know what? You can have anything you want as a reward. You name it and it's yours. Horses, camels, a palace, whatever it is, you can have it. Just name it. And Sissa thought about this for a minute and he said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take 1 grain of rice and put it on the first square of a chessboard. I want you to take 2 grains of rice and put it on the second square. And I want you to keep doubling it until you get to the very end. Now, there are 64 squares on a chessboard. And so the ruler thought about this for a little bit, and he said, that's it? I mean, how much rice could this possibly be? And so he called over his servants, and he said, figure out how much rice this is. Let's pay this guy off. And the servants came together. Weeks, months go by, and they try to figure out how much rice this is going to be. And finally, they come back to the ruler, and they tell him how much rice. And his jaw drops. It turns out that there wouldn't even be that much rice on planet Earth today. It would be more than a Mount Everest of rice. And there are 2 versions of the story. The first version is the ruler was so furious that he chopped off Sissa's head. The second version is the one I like better, and that is that Sissa then becomes the ruler of the land. He now becomes the wealthy king. So most people believe that we're at the second half of the chessboard. And what I mean by that is, when you get to the second half of the chessboard, the growth for these grains of rice becomes exponential. In other words, when you start off at the very beginning, it's gradual growth, right? 1, 2, 4, right? It's very slow. But when you get to the second half of that chessboard, every time you jump from one square to the next, the growth isn't like this. It's like this. It's a hockey stick. And this is where most technologists believe we are at today. The second half of the chessboard where growth is becoming exponential. Right? Even on a yearly basis, the changes that we're seeing, the growth that we're seeing are truly amazing. And there are a couple of trends that we're starting to see fuel and power AI. More data, decreasing technology costs, Moore's law, and speed. Now, there are other trends out there, but these are among some of the most impactful trends that we're seeing that are fueling a lot of these conversations on AI and the impact that it could potentially have. Consider that 90% of the world's data has been created in the past 2 years. Since the beginning of time, 90% of all data in existence created in the past 2 years. That is a staggering thing to think about. It's staggering. And because we have so much data and so much stuff, this is a great opportunity for AI to make sense of this stuff, to try to figure out what it means to extract insights, to give all of this data to algorithms and software so that those software and algorithms can become better, stronger, so that they can do things that we couldn't do. So that's the first trend that we're seeing, massive increases in amounts of data. The second I mentioned is technology costs. Now, there are a lot of different charts that can be used to talk about technology costs. I really like this one. This is the cost to basically sequence human DNA. This is per megabase of DNA sequence. There are around 3,000 plus megabase pairs for an average for a human genome. You can see the cost plummeted faster than Moore's law. It used to be thousands of dollars to try to sequence these things. Now, pennies. Pennies. And we're seeing these numbers across the board. This is an ad from a Radio Shack in 1991. Almost every single thing on that ad you carry with you now in your pocket. Almost every single thing in 1991 that you would have spent thousands of dollars on, you now carry around with you in your pocket. We forget this, right? And these things are only increasing, right? The phones are becoming more powerful. They're doing crazier things every year. In 1969, when we launched the Apollo spacecraft, this is what the guidance computer looked like. And it cost $3.5 million. It was the size of a car, and the technology rivaled a modern-day toaster oven. And we were using this to launch people to space. Right? Think about that. Now, if you were to compare this to an iPhone 6, I'm not even talking about the iPhone 8, the iPhone 10, none of this stuff. An iPhone 6. An iPhone 6 had the computing power, the capacity, to launch 120 million Apollo spacecraft at the same time. 120 million. How many of you are carrying around a smartphone, iPhone, something in the last few years, Samsung, any one of those? Okay, almost everybody. You could have essentially launched 120 million Apollo spacecraft with what you have in your pocket. Okay, that just goes to show the changes that we're starting to see. We are literally walking around with supercomputers in our pockets. Supercomputers. Most of us don't even realize it. Right? We're busy texting and checking email without realizing that we have what NASA wished they had years ago. I mentioned Moore's Law, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the concept, which basically refers to how many transistors we can fit onto a microprocessor. More transistors you can fit onto a microprocessor, the more powerful that microprocessor becomes. The more of those microprocessors you can use in a device, the more powerful the device becomes. That's why every year these iPhones are becoming more powerful, yet somehow thinner, because of Moore's Law. Transistors are getting smaller, going onto microprocessors, going into your phone, and look at the tremendous growth we have seen over the past few years, right? And you can imagine what will happen in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, what kind of a supercomputer will exist that you can fit on the head of a pin. So we see tremendous growth with all of these things. Supercomputers are measured by flops. Now, to be honest with you, it doesn't matter what flops stands for and what it means. The point is that this is how a supercomputer is measured. And by the measure of supercomputers, you can see how much growth we are starting to see, how much more powerful these supercomputers are becoming. It's scary to think about what's going to happen in 5 years' time, 10 years' time with this supercomputing power. Now, I mentioned cost again. One more chart on cost I want to share with you. This is the cost per microprocessor cycle, microprocessor transistor cycle. Right? Look at the cost. They're plummeting. And again, we see this across the board. I mean, cloud storage is another example of where costs are declining. Remember when you actually had to pay a lot of money for cloud storage? Companies are now giving away cloud storage for you to sign up with their products. You want 100 gigs? That's fine. I don't know, give us like $2. Right? I mean, these companies are literally giving away cloud storage. That's unthinkable. You know how many millions of dollars it would cost to have access to 100 gigabytes of information? If not billions a couple decades ago? It's crazy. And this is a chart that Singularity created, which I think is interesting and a little scary. And these are projections and predictions for how the growth of computing is going to impact intelligence, human-rivaled intelligence. And there are a couple of scary things to think about. The first is one human brain. So how long will it take before the computing power that we are able to create is able to match the intelligence and the capacity and capability of a human brain? It's not that far off. The scarier part is how long will it take before we reach the capacity for AI to have all human brains. 8 billion people, 9, 10 billion people at that point on planet Earth. We're talking not that far off. So technology is clearly growing. It's becoming more powerful. It's becoming faster. It's starting to do things that it wasn't able to do years ago. So we think about all of this. We think about technology and AI, and of course we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean for human jobs? What does this mean for all of us? Now, quick show of hands, how many of you in the room are a little bit more pessimistic, skeptical, fearful of what AI and technology means for jobs? Put your hands up. Okay, a couple people. How many of you are optimistic about the future? Okay, a lot of optimists. But also some people that are more fearful. Now, the people that are a little bit more fearful and skeptical, I'm guessing you have likely come across lots of this. Lots of these types of articles, lots of this type of research that's been put out there. And the numbers, by the way, vary across the board. 2% of jobs will be automated. 5 million jobs will be automated. 2 billion jobs will be automated. 47% of the workforce will be automated. Which is it? 2 million, 2 billion. That's a big number. So what is it? This is a lot of what we keep being bombarded with on a daily basis. Now, those of you that are more optimistic about the future of work and the role that AI might play, you may have come across these types of articles. Now, there are a couple of organizations here which are not named, but I'll name them. The 17,000 roles, that was Accenture. And I talked to the chief leadership and people officer at Accenture. And when I interviewed her, she said, we have automated thousands of jobs inside of Accenture. And I said, well, that sucks. And she said, no. But we didn't lose any people. We just automated the job. And all the jobs that were automated were in finance. These were people that were traditionally just doing number crunching kind of stuff. And what they did is they took those thousands of employees around Accenture's offices that were doing number crunching, and they upskilled them to focus more on being strategic advisors to their clients. And they said, you don't need to crunch the numbers for the clients. You need to help them understand what these numbers mean and help them figure out what to do with these numbers. McDonald's, another organization, they're putting in kiosks at a lot of their locations so that when you go into a McDonald's store and you order food, you don't need to order from a human. You can just order from a kiosk. You push a couple of buttons, you don't need to look at anybody, you don't need to talk to anybody, and your food will be ready. Sounds great. Unless you work at McDonald's. And there were lots of articles that were coming out that were saying McDonald's will automate hundreds of thousands of jobs, it's going to be terrible. And I talked to David Fairhurst, their chief people officer, and I said, look, there's a lot of concern that you guys are going to be letting go of a lot of people. Is that what's going on? And he said, no. Actually, what we're doing is we are, in some cases, increasing the headcount in our stores, but in a lot of cases, the headcount stays the same. And that's because we as an organization are focused more, we're going to focus more on creating an experience for our customers. We're going to ask them how their day is going. We're going to bring them their food. We're going to create that experience for them that you could not get simply by interacting with technology. And I see this time and time again. Amazon, another example. They've probably automated more jobs than any company on planet Earth. They've probably also created more jobs than any company. They keep going into new ventures, new business opportunities, right? Keep exploring new things. And there's a big disconnect between what the research says and between what organizations are doing. Now, if you look at the previous article, if you remember some of those headlines, those are articles from research. Those are all people that have hypothesized, theorized, created studies around what's going to happen to job loss. These articles are from organizations who are actually saying what has happened to their workforce as a result of automation. So there's a huge disconnect between what the research says versus what organizations are actually saying is happening. Now, of course, nobody knows what the future brings, but I think it's very interesting to point out that there is that big difference between the two. Now, one of the things that always personally frustrates me when we talk about jobs and automation and job loss is we always say jobs are going to be lost, as if they're a set of car keys. Right? Anybody ever come home one day, you put your job on the table, and then you just forget where your job went? No, I hope not. Jobs are not a set of keys that you just lose. Jobs are taken. And one of the ways that an organization will take jobs if it consciously decides that humans suck. Right? If an organization comes together, they bring together the executive team, they all sit together around a table, and they say, you know what? Humans suck. They're garbage. We should just get rid of all of them and use software instead. And everybody says, yeah, you're right. Let's fire everybody. Bring in the bots. That's one way that jobs will be taken. But thankfully, I don't think that is what we're starting to see. Thankfully, we're not starting to see that. We're seeing more of an emphasis on humans working with technology instead of against it. Not human versus technology, but human with technology against problem. And interestingly enough, we're actually seeing some organizations take a step back from automation. I mean, Elon Musk, who used an enormous amount of automation in his factories, on an earnings call recently said, you know what? We made the mistake of relying too much on automation. We're going to bring some humans back in. A couple of weeks ago, there was an article about IBM's Watson, about the challenges that it's having in the healthcare field. Because I'm sure you remember, when Watson was first becoming popular, a lot of people thought IBM Watson is what's going to help cure cancer, diagnose cancer. It's going to be huge in the medical space. Turns out Watson's having a lot of problems in that space because it's not able to keep up with the changes that we're starting to see in the field of research. So some organizations are actually pulling back a little bit on this. But overall, I think we're starting to see more organizations approach this idea of automation, of working with humans instead of against humans. And I think that's a very exciting thing to see. Now, I was never a good student. My my high school GPA was 2.79. My community college GPA, I went to Santa Monica Community College, was a whopping 2.8. Okay, so I bumped it up a little bit. I then went to the University of California, Santa Cruz. No banana slugs? One? Oh, my friend. We're going to hang out later. So I went to the University of California, Santa Cruz. I double majored in economics and psychology, graduated with honors. I was super excited to join the corporate world. I thought, this is it. This is why I worked so hard, because I'm going to join the corporate world. I'm going to go up through the ranks. I'm going to go back and get my MBA. And one day I'm going to become the CMO of a company like IBM or Coca-Cola. And so I went to go interview for my first job at a college. And during the interview process, I was told that I would be meeting with executives, traveling across the country, doing all sorts of really cool stuff. And so naturally, I got excited about this, and I said, okay, I'll take the job. Now, keep in mind that I had an hour-and-a-half commute to work and an hour-and-a-half commute back from work every day in downtown Los Angeles, worst traffic in the United States. 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week, I was driving. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to take the job because of the opportunity that it's going to afford me, because of what I was told I would be doing. So I took the job. A couple of months in, I'm doing data entry, cold calling, PowerPoint presentations. And one day, the CEO comes out of his beautiful corner office, and he screams from across the room, "Jacob, I got a really important project for you. Get over here." My ears perked up. Again, I got that rush, that excitement. I went over to the CEO and I said, "Yeah, what is it?" And he takes out his wallet. From his wallet, he produces a nice, crisp, clean $10 bill, slaps it in my hand. And he says, I'm late for a meeting. I need you to go run down to Starbucks and get me a cup of coffee. And by the way, get yourself a latte as well. You're so generous. Thank you very much. My immediate reaction was, what are you, out of your freaking mind? This is why I work so hard in school, is to get you a cup of coffee? You idiot, get your own stupid cup of coffee. That's what I thought on the inside. On the outside, of course, I said, I would love to get you that cup of coffee. That's why I took this job, right, to get you coffee. Hope it burns your face off. And so that was one of the last full-time jobs I've ever had working for anybody else around 10 years ago. And ever since then, I've been so passionate and interested in all these things around the future of work, technology, automation, employee experience, all this cool stuff that we're starting to see. And I thought about that experience for a long time, and I thought, should I be surprised that that happened to me? Because that happens to so many people inside of organizations around the world. Now, consider for a minute that if you look up the word employee in the dictionary, you will find that synonyms from our dictionary include cog and servant. Wow. Cog or servant as a synonym for employee. Now, I know all of you in this room are managers. You're not off the hook either, because guess what the synonyms for manager are? Boss and zookeeper. You are all zookeepers. And if you look up the word work in the dictionary, you find that synonyms include daily grind, drudgery, struggle. Now, if you put these three things together, what it means is that we are all cogs working for a zookeeper, all of you zookeepers, as we go about our daily drudgery. Wow. Work sucks. This is literally how we have built our organizations over the last 10, 50, 100, and 150 years. On top of these ways of thinking about work, which are so outdated. So one of the things that I think we need to start with is redefining what work actually means. Work, what typically comes to mind? I feel like for many decades, for many years, work used to be just about kind of making money. You took a job, you made money, and then you used that money to pay for your bills, your expenses, to buy stuff. But I think now, and especially going forward, work is much more about identity, a sense of self, purpose. It's how you kind of measure up. It's what creates your life. And this is a very different way, I believe, for us to think about work. Because now, if you as an organization have a job that you put up online, for years it just used to be kind of like, here's a job, we're gonna pay you for it, like blah, 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 that's it. But now what we're starting to see is that that's not how we think about work. We think about work as like the way that we think about life. How is this job going to impact my life? Am I going to have a sense of purpose and meaning? How is this going to contribute to me as a person? And that's just like this crazy different way for us to think about a job or a career. It's not just about expenses and bills to pay. This is like your soul. This is your reason for being, like who you are as an individual. And when we kind of wrap our minds around that, we realize why it's so important for us to connect the work that we as individuals do to the impact that we have inside of our organizations, to the impact that we have in the lives of customers, to the impact that we have on the community or to the world in general. And these things are very, very important. So what I encourage you to think about, and your managers and your executives to think about, is what are you doing specifically inside of your organization that measures up, that kind of transitions to this new way for us to think about work? Do you still think about work as a job? Do you still think about all those positions that you need to fill just as expenses, as employees that you need to bring in? Or do you look at these job postings as sort of like, how is this going to become a part of a person? How is this going to contribute to a sense of meaning and purpose in somebody's life? How is this going to kind of make a person whole? Because I think that's how we're starting to view work, and it's actually a good thing. So what do we do? What do we do? Now that the world of work is changing, the way that we think about work is changing and it has to change, what do we do? 1,200 of you, managers, leaders in this room, where do you begin with trying to transform? The first thing actually builds a lot on what Jack said earlier, and it's this idea of being a perpetual learner. I like to think of it actually as being a super perpetual learner. Perpetual learning is essentially this idea of learning how to learn. But if you think about it, every year that goes by, you inherently learn something new. I mean, you know something now that you didn't know last year or the year before. It's kind of just a part of being a human on planet Earth. But being a super perpetual learner means that you learn quickly, you learn frequently, you learn things and you apply them on an ongoing basis, and you can do so at scale. Being a super perpetual learner means that you can no longer rely on educational institutions or on organizations to teach you everything you need to know to be successful. You need to be accountable and responsible for your own personal growth and development. The CEO of AT&T recently went in front of his entire company, hundreds of thousands of employees around the world. And he said, look, if you are not willing to be a perpetual learner, if you are not willing to do these things inside of AT&T, you should quit. We'll give you the tools, we'll give you the resources you need to be successful, but sometimes you might need to use your own resources. Sometimes you might need to use your own time. And if you can't make that commitment, then you shouldn't be a part of this company. So you need to be more accountable over your own personal and professional development. Don't rely on any company or on any educational institutions to give you everything you need to know to be successful. It's now up to you. Now, part of being a super perpetual learner also means paying attention to the tangential. Paying attention to the tangential means being aware of things that are not just in front of you, but things that are a little bit on the periphery as well. So I'll give you an example. A lot of people used to work on Wall Street, and over the past few years, we've seen a lot of technology come in and take away a lot of those Wall Street jobs. Right? Doing that analysis, picking those stocks, that used to be all done by people manually, crunching numbers and data, all done by algorithms. Now, if you were an employee on Wall Street at that time, paying attention to the tangential would mean understanding how your skills and abilities can be applied to things outside of your current job. And so if you saw this impact that technology was having, as somebody that paid attention to the tangential, your first line of thinking would be, where else can my skills and abilities be applied? And you would probably notice that there is a huge growth in data science and people analytics and HR organizations around the world that need these exact skills that you use in finance, but applied towards people. So pay attention to the tangential. Focus more on skills instead of on jobs. I believe jobs are oftentimes very linear. We create a single path for a job. Skills, on the other hand, can be applied to many, many different jobs that are out there. So pay attention to the tangential. Now, my family was born in the Republic of Georgia. And usually when I say Georgia, people think of the like, hey, y'all, I'm from the South kind of Georgia. I'm not talking about that place. I'm talking about the hello, Mother Russia kind of Georgia, right? Very different part of the world. In fact, my original last name isn't even Morgan. It's Mami Sashvili. Try saying that 3 times fast. And so my family left the Republic of Georgia. They migrated to Italy where my mom and my dad actually met, even though they both lived in the Republic of Georgia. Migrated to Italy, that's where they met. They then moved to Australia, which is where they got married, where I was born, and then ultimately ended up coming to the United States. Now, when my dad came to the United States, he did not speak a word of English. And he learned how to speak English by watching the Johnny Carson show with a Russian to English translation dictionary. Right? So when I think of a perpetual learner, a super perpetual learner, that's what I think of. I think of my dad who had to learn to speak a language on his own by watching a TV show. Now, how many of you have had this happen? You are in conversation with somebody or you're sending an email to somebody and that person says, "I'm so heads down." How many of you have said, "I'm so heads down"? Okay, few people. This is an expression that we always use. "I'm sorry, I can't. I'm just so heads down. I'm so focused. I'm just doing this one thing right now." But guess what? The world that we live in today, it's not good enough to be heads down. You need to be heads up. You need to be heads side to side. You need to be heads all around you. And in fact, I think the way that you need to think of yourself is the same way that we think of an app.
Chances are you have a smartphone, probably much like this one. Doesn't necessarily have to be an iPhone, but probably a smartphone of some kind. And like me, when you open up your smartphone, you likely get notifications from the apps that you have on your phone that ask you to update them. They either come out with new features, new bug fixes, and these updates for these apps happen all the time. Sometimes they can happen weekly, sometimes monthly, sometimes every couple months. But regardless, these apps are updated all the time. What if you were to think of yourself as the app? Right? You are the app. And to be successful and relevant in this new world of work, you too need to upgrade yourself all the time. You need to find bugs and fix them. You need to upgrade yourself with new features, with new skills. And if you think of yourself just like an app on your phone, and how often you update those apps, you'll really get a perspective around how often you need to upgrade your skills. This is why the importance of learning how to learn is one of the most important skills when we think about the future of work. So what kind of an app are you? And how often are you updating that app?
The next thing that I think is super crucial for all of you to think about is this difference between a bad manager versus a good manager. Because one of the areas where we're going to see a lot of impact when it comes to technology is for management and leadership inside of organizations. Now, think about, in your mind, the role of a manager. Think about your job and what you do on a daily basis. Now, stereotypically, a manager is responsible for two things. Right? You have two roles inside of your company. On the one hand, you're responsible for decision making. You have access to data that maybe other people don't. You set the direction, and you basically are that person that tells people what to do. The second role of a manager is to engage and empower and motivate and inspire other people to go in that direction. A good manager does both of those things well. A bad manager only focuses on one of those things, the decision-making, the telling other people what to do. Now, if we know what's happening in the world of technology and the data that we're starting to see and how AI and algorithms are able to access this data and make sense of this data, if you're a bad manager that's only focused on the decision-making piece and AI is able to do that decision-making piece better than you, faster than you, more accurately than you, then what good are you? No use. If you're a good manager and you also focus on this other stuff, the human stuff, all of a sudden you become 10 times more valuable inside of the organization. Because it's not easy to engage and empower and motivate and inspire others. And those are the types of managers and leaders that I think are going to dominate and crush the future of work. So the bad managers, I think, will get weeded out. The good managers are going to have tremendous opportunity inside of organizations. And one of the things that a good manager does is based on this idea of coaching and mentoring. Right? Coaching and mentoring. And I visit a lot of organizations, and they always tell me that they have a coaching and mentoring program. But when I explore these coaching and mentoring programs in more detail, I find that the way that they work is a little bit backwards. Because typically what happens is a manager or a more successful person at the company will get paired with somebody who is perhaps less successful and junior at the company. And the goal is that the more successful person will help the less successful person become more successful. And that sounds good. Until the person who is less successful starts to become just as successful as the other person. And then this person gets a little upset and jealous because the other person is starting to go above them. They're starting to get promoted faster than them. All of a sudden, that person is now in charge of this person. And what we try to do in our organizations is we try to keep that from happening. In other words, we have this mentality of we will coach you and mentor you up until the point where you become as successful as me, and then I will hold you there for all eternity. That's not coaching and mentoring. So I want you to think that your job and the mentality that you should have is that when you show up every day to work, your job is to help make other people more successful than you. That's what a true coach does. That's what a true mentor does. And if you show up every day to work believing that your job is to help make other people more successful than you, the actions that you take, the behaviors that you exhibit, all of these things will start to change. Now, how many of you have kids? Okay, a lot of people. So I have a 2-year-old, which, by the way, when Jack said that 4-year-olds will ask 300 questions, I'm now terrified. I have 2 years to get to that point. But those of you that have kids, how many of you, when your child does something that you couldn't do, or maybe they do something better than you, how many of you ever look at that child and say, how dare you? I am your creator. You're doing that? I couldn't do it? What the hell's the matter with you? You flick them over. I'm hoping none of you. Right? Instead, you look at those kids with a sense of pride and accomplishment and wonder. You get that little tear or twinkle in your eye, and instead you say, I'm proud of you. Why can't we have that same mentality and belief inside of our organizations when we think of coaching and mentoring? Right? That's what a coach and mentor does. So your job is to help make other people more successful than you. And this comes back to this idea of emphasizing and focusing on the human skills. Jack talked about empathy, right? Self-awareness. All of these human skills are so important. I don't know that song. I'm working on a new book on the future of leadership. And I've had the opportunity to now interview around 95 CEOs around the world. And consistently, when I ask these CEOs, what do you think is going to be most crucial for leaders of the future, almost all of them point to these human skills. Empathy, self-awareness, specifically keep coming up. Curiosity, right? These are fundamentally human skills. So one of the things that I think we need to do, one of the things that all of you need to do as managers and leaders inside of your organization is to focus more on these human skills and what that means. I keep hearing a lot about the automation of the workplace that we're going to start to see, this integration of technology and automation and AI into pretty much everything that we do and in every way that we work. And if you think about this massive transformation, this massive influx of technology inside of our organizations, it sort of makes you take a step back and wonder, well, what is going to be the role of humans? What is going to be the point of humans in that type of an organization where we see so much influx and integration of technology and AI? And after traveling and speaking at so many different events and meeting with various people and employees, I'm convinced that the one thing that is going to be so crucial about the future of work and the main role that humans are going to be able to play is to be human. That is the one thing that we, I think, take for granted, is our ability to connect with others, our ability to empathize, to have sympathy, to be vulnerable, our ability to connect with one another, to communicate on a human level. That is something that technology cannot do. That is something that technology cannot replace. That is something that AI is not going to be able to take away from us, and that is something that AI cannot do. So when we think about the future of work and what all of these different technologies mean for the workplace, the one thing that I think we can all take away from this is we need to learn how to be more human. We have to do what we are good at. We have to connect. We have to build those relationships. Those of us that are going to be good at doing that, those of us that are going to be good at being human, I think those are the ones that are going to succeed and grow and expand when we think about the future of work. So as much as we want to think about AI and technology coming into the workplace, let's not forget about the one thing that makes us human, being human. Let's remember to bring that into the workplace. One of the other things that I keep hearing about from executives and CEOs, and one of the other crucial skills that I think managers need to have, is this idea to think like a futurist. Oftentimes, business executives say, we want people who can see around corners. But we all know that you can't actually see around a corner, can you? And that's actually not what futurists do either. Instead, what a futurist does is to help make sure that when you turn the corner, you're not surprised by what you find on the other side. That's not the same thing as predicting the future. So I want you to imagine for a minute that you're peering through the narrow end of a cone. And this is oftentimes a tool that futurists use to try to understand what the future might look like. So imagine you're peering through the narrow end of a cone. And the narrowest part of that cone represents the closest time horizon. A couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, maybe a year. We're pretty good at understanding and knowing what tomorrow will bring, what the next few weeks might bring, what even the rest of this year might bring. But when you get farther out, things become a little bit fuzzier. And then you start to see different options, different scenarios start to come into play. And this is where futurists spend a lot of time. You see, when we ask, what is the future of work, we make two huge incorrect assumptions. The first assumption that we make is that there's only one future. There's only one possible thing that can happen. What is it going to be? That assumption is wrong. The second assumption that we always make is that the future is something that happens to us. It's not something that we can control or shape. It's like somebody's getting ready to punch you in the stomach, and all you can do is just kind of, brace yourself, getting ready to take the hit. But instead, I want you to think that there are several potential futures that might happen. And instead, I want you to think that you are a more active participant in creating and shaping what that future is going to be like. So you need to ask yourself, what is your future of work? And how do you want to make that happen? How are you going to build and design and create that future of work? Don't just stand idly by like a leaf blowing in the wind and expect these things to happen to you. You can think about these different types of scenarios. What do you think might happen? What's likely to happen? What do you want to happen? And perhaps more importantly, what do you need to do to make sure that what you want to happen actually does happen? Now, we've been talking a lot about AI and automation and the potential role that all of this can have. And if you haven't guessed by now, I am an optimist when we think about the future of work, when we think about the role that technology is going to play and the importance of us being more human means inside of our organizations. And optimism, too, is an important skill that all of you need to make sure that you bring in to your organization every day.
Skill that I think we need to possess, whether we're entry-level employees, mid-level managers, or senior-level executives, is this ability to be optimistic. You look at the news today, you look online, you look at social media, and you're just kind of bombarded with negativity. So much negativity, in fact, that you're sort of like, why even bother getting out of bed? Like, everything sucks, the world is coming to an end, we're gonna have wars with these people, we're gonna be attacking these people. Like, I'm just gonna stay in bed and watch the world burn. And it's so crucial for us to be optimistic. It's so crucial for us to be able to do that, because if you're not optimistic, you kind of lose any desire to take action. And this, I think, is a very important skill to have. How do you continue to wake up every morning thinking, you know what, I'm gonna make an impact, I'm gonna make a difference, things are gonna be great, things are gonna be positive. If you can put yourself into that mindset on a regular basis, I think you're gonna have one leg up over everybody else. While everybody else is walking around being upset and depressed and reading the news and social media, you need to walk around thinking about how you're going to make an impact, how you're gonna be positive, how things are moving in the right direction. And think about things that you're grateful for. Think about your daily gratitudes, right? Which is a common meditation practice that a lot of people use. Think about what you're grateful for and try to name 3 to 5 things every single day. Put yourself in that positive, in that optimistic mindset, and try to push away all the negative stuff that keeps bombarding you in the head. Because when we think about the future of work, really the only way that you're going to be able to succeed is if you have a positive outlook on life, if you have a positive outlook on work. So be positive, be optimistic.
So there's a famous quote, and nobody exactly knows where the quote came from. Some people say Voltaire, some people say Spider-Man. Right? It's all over the map. And I'm sure you've all heard it. And that is, with great power comes great responsibility. But I think the opposite is true. With great responsibility comes great power. And so if you become more responsible, more active, more of a driving force in what you want the future of work to look like, you will have more power. So if you want to future-proof your life, you want to future-proof your career, your organization, I encourage you to think about, what do you want the future of work to look like, and how are you going to make that future happen? Thank you.